Hello everyone, today we are live on Twitch and I'm going over the Sandbox changes, which might be a short video, might be a longer one. My bets is on a longer one depending on how much I rant, and I tend to rant a lot. So let's go through all of the Sandbox changes and share my quick, or maybe perhaps not so quick, thoughts on all of the changes, because there's some substantial things happening. So the first hottest topic there is, of course, is recoil changes, mainly affecting mouse and keyboard. And I already know that there is going to be a healthy amount of people that probably think I shouldn't be able to comment on this, seeing as I don't play mouse and keyboard and I've made controller for the entirety of Destiny 2. But alas, I will give my thoughts on this. Coming later this year, we're making some changes to the recoil stat. So it's preparing for crossplay for the masses, I guess you could say, playing against each other with either mouse or keyboard, not just the masses on console playing against controllers only. So it says currently several weapon archetypes have their recoil reduced by 40% depending on the archetype when using mouse and keyboard. So it seems like they actually did tune this based on the archetype, of course, which is cool. This results in an issue where players on mouse and keyboard are able to largely ignore the stability weapon stat, creating unintended discrepancies in weapon performance between controllers and mouse and keyboard. I think that was actually really good wording there, and maybe we'll get into that in a moment. But it says the following weapon archetypes will have their mouse and keyboard recoil adjusted closer to controller. So they reduce the difference by 40% better stability to 20%. So that's roughly, give or take, depending on the archetype, a 20% reduction in stability. So we have auto rifles, scout rifles, pulses, SMGs, hand cannons, and machine guns all falling into those changes. So some of the weapons, though, like they say in the case of the pulse rifle, submachine gun, and machine gun, they're also going to be including some buffs. So it says in some cases, these weapons will have less recoil across both controller and mouse and keyboard compared to what's in the game today. And it mentions a lot of changes to the SMGs, pulses, and machine guns, of course, saying that they reduce the camera movement from firing an SMG by 24%, which is pretty substantial. And pulse rifles also that camera movement by 7%, again on the machine guns by 9.5%. So this is a pretty big change, pretty hot topic. I think the one thing to talk about with these buffs that's interesting is that they're looking at the camera movement itself. Remember, I think there is different portions of recoil, right? So there are the weapon's recoil itself and it kind of flailing around. There's the barrel moving, and then there's the sights of the weapon, and then I believe there's also the screen shake and the camera climbing. I think if I got that right, I hope I didn't mess that up. But there are different forms of recoil and what it affects, and this seems to be them tackling the actual camera shake and movement upwards, which is probably what you feel the most. So these weapons are still gonna like probably recoil itself, like the weapon itself, but your camera is not going to move quite as much, which is going to make them feel a lot more wieldy, and you can aim them a lot better. And this seems to be proportionate enough for them to keep it across the board for both M&K and controller. I don't think pulses maybe needed much on controller, but apparently it happened. They changed it for both because M&K was seeing a change. SMGs, I think that was mainly a controller change. A lot of people said that SMGs are unwieldy on controller, and maybe with the new M&K changes they were as well. Overall, I think these are good changes. I think that's cool. But to talk about the main thing, the stability going down on mouse and keyboard. I see a lot of polar opposite opinions on this. I am of the opinion that this is a good thing. I don't think it's a secret at this point that a lot of people, since the beginning of Destiny 2 being on PC, has said that stability is pretty much an ignorable stat. I think that is a common consensus. That is a normal thing. Content creators, myself included, have said, and notable players have said, that stability is not something you worry so much about on mouse and keyboard because it's already so high, so that you can go and invest in other stats like range perhaps and handling. So this is really interesting because they actually say this in the TWAB here, where it's creating unintended discrepancies in weapon performance between controller and mouse and keyboard. And I don't want to focus on the last part of between controller and mouse and keyboard saying one's better or not, but I want to talk about the fact that it creates unintended discrepancies in weapon performance. Something like the 120 RPM hand cannons have a ton of range, yes, but we can't go around saying that, wow, you can 3-tap someone or, you know, get insane range at like 50 meters because with like a max range hand cannon. On mouse and keyboard, you can get by with that and still be able to shoot pretty decently well. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but shoot decently well at that really far range with a max range 120 because the stability is already so high. Whereas on controller, you're gonna have a lot harder of a time if you're not properly investing in a mix of range and stability. And range and stability govern one another. So usually in this game, when you have more range, you're getting or really investing in the upper levels of range that can really push a weapon out or to perform outside of its, you know, main intended ranges, like really push a weapon's performance out. When you're investing in that higher end of range, you're usually losing out on stability. Full bore, for an example, I'm pretty sure that's the barrel that gives more stability and more range and less stability. It's a good example of that. So when you get more range, you're getting less stability. And in many cases, when you get more stability, like with steady rounds, you're getting less range when you're getting those big investments in stability. And of course, to go into the whole cone meme, they do, of course, work with one another in terms of accuracy and keeping aim assist sustained as well. So I think that the main problem here that Bungie identifies is that stability is an ignorable stat on one of the input methods. And that is causing certain weapons to perform much better than maybe anticipated for them outside of where they would be thinking that they're going to perform that well and that consistently. This also creates a scenario with, let's say, a 120 hand cannon where if you do want to invest that high into range, you have to be very good at controlling the recoil at range. And I've said it in the past, I think that stability or high stability or a good amount of stability also affects your performance at range because it's going to affect how consistently you can hit shots. Because of course, if you're not hitting shots, you're not dealing damage. But if you can control that recoil while going for high range, you get to reap the rewards, and I think that's okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, on mouse and keyboard, you can still get to the level of stability that you currently have. You'll just have to invest more into it, which again is going to balance out the range capability of some weapons and present more opportunity costs, because it's really about opportunity costs. But before I go more into mouse and keyboard specifics, there are a lot of suggestions saying that why not just bring controller stability up. In Destiny 1, we had a lot more stability. In fact, I have a video that shows Destiny 1's recoil compared to the recoil now on weapons, and yeah, it's a lot higher, or it seems to be a lot higher. However, I think Destiny 1 had a lot less aim assist and a lot less generous aim assist than we have now. And aim assist is not reticle friction I'm talking about the aim assist cone. How wide that area that we have is to be off target and still land headshots, or maybe still land shots where the bullets are going to curve towards the target. That's far more generous than we've ever had in Destiny 1. So by that logic, if we were to make controller stability higher, I think it would actually potentially be more problematic, because it's going to be able to get reticle friction firstly, and high stability. And when you get high stability, you don't have anything to knock you off target, to have to require your target, or at least have to keep your weapon on target within the aim assist cone, of course. And that to me sounds very, very strong. I want to say that almost sounds more problematic than what they've done here in increasing mouse and keyboard recoil. Again, if you've ever played bottom tree golden gun on controller, if you've ever tried a 180 RPM hand cannon, you feel how it feels to have very, very low recoil, keep your weapon on target and not be knocked off, and have reticle friction. And I think that's insanely strong. So if they're looking to balance these inputs a little bit better, I think that improving the controller recoil will only make the game a lot easier because of the copious amounts of aim assist, but it will also be, I think, more problematic for mouse and keyboard players because, again, low stability, not taking you off target and off your aim assist cone with reticle friction, is absurdly strong, I think. Oh, in terms of the movement and recoil, let's say with hand cannons on mouse and keyboard, going back to the aim assist cone discussion, because it's so generous right now, and the point in the game that we find ourselves is with very, very generous levels of aim assist, I don't think the recoil on mouse and keyboard, especially at the hand cannon sweet spot at least, is enough to even knock you off of the aim assist, or of the aim assist cone, the radius of it in most cases. When you get something like, as an example, let's say Hawk Moon, or even some of the 120s, which, you know, have more time to reset the recoil in between shots. At least, again, for Hawkmoon, for sure, when I was testing, it doesn't move enough off of the target, or the recoil doesn't move it off enough of where the aim assist cone allows you to still kind of peg headshots, especially at the sweet spot range of like 35 meters. So I really think that a small adjustment to recoil is the right answer based on, I think, how strong controller would be without recoil, which I think is a necessity, and how strong M&K is right now, essentially not having enough recoil to even nudge them a bit off of the aim assist cone after a few shots. So overall, I think I like this change, and again, it is solving the problem of stability being an irrelevant stat, and I think that's the main issue that Bungie's tackling. I forgot to mention again, stability being increased on controller as well doesn't solve the problem of stability being an irrelevant stat on mouse and keyboard. It just makes it more irrelevant everywhere. So this, I think, is just really about opportunity cost and increasing opportunity cost and making sure that you have decisions to make when you're investing in a quote-unquote god role or your ideal role. Really thinking about, do I want to be hitting a sweet spot of two things, or am I good enough to control this recoil consistently enough that I want to go full range? Or maybe, you know what, I really value consistent recoil and low recoil to stay on target, so I'm going to dock myself in range and go for stability. See a comment here, one of the arguments is that controller players want less recoil on console, but people forget that's an FOV issue that could make controller players on PC next gen crazy. Yeah, I do agree that I think that from playing on controller with PC for so long, the FOV does play a big role in terms of how the jarring and how intense the recoil feels, and from playing controller on PC, I think it feels fine, so I'm inclined to say that that's also an FOV thing. Again though, I really do think that controller having lower recoil comparable to that of M&K with as much reticle friction, and most importantly, how much aim assist, how generous the aim assist cone is in this game now for a lot of weapons, I think that could be more problematic for M&K users than a little bit of less stability for them. So something I forgot about mouse and keyboard and the recoil is that you might be wondering, well, how does mouse and keyboard still have enough of an advantage, or not advantage, but benefits in comparison to controller? Mouse and keyboard, if you don't know already, has a few benefits like inherently higher accuracy, which means it doesn't mean directly higher aim assist, but higher accuracy means higher chance to be aim assisted. It means less bloom effect, so that your bullets have more chance of going completely straight, which also affects your inner accuracy performance as well, and being aim assisted on top of that. Speaking of aim assist, when you jump on mouse and keyboard, you don't get an aim assist cone penalty, which does take place on controller. This is why a lot of M&K players can play in the air as confidently as they can, not just because of Icarus, but because they're not getting an aim assist cone penalty that draws back or draws in their aim assist cone, so they have to be more exact. That is a benefit of playing mouse and keyboard. The other thing about stability on mouse and keyboard is that the aim assist cone does not have a penalty, or a very, very slight, if anything, penalty for shooting repeatedly. So when I'm firing repeatedly on mouse and keyboard, the aim assist cone doesn't shrink as much, or nearly, if at all, like controller, where the stability stat is what's responsible for stopping it from shrinking. So on controller, when you shoot repeatedly, your aim assist cone shrinks, and it shrinks less depending on how high stability you have. On mouse and keyboard, that is far less, or maybe not a factor. The other thing on mouse and keyboard, in some instances, not all instances, it has an inherently wider aim assist cone as well. So these are still benefits of playing mouse and keyboard that's going to make it feel very precise still, and still feel beneficial towards controller, while still having a slightly less recoil that I feel like you can also make up for by investing more in stability. Of course, there's some weapons that are just inherently going to have more recoil, but again, I've said with all the many reasons here why I think this is a good thing overall. So that's my thoughts on that. I think that pretty much covers all of that, which I think is one of the hottest topics right now. So feel free to disagree with me. Feel free. I'm sure there's going to be people that tell me like you shouldn't be commenting on this because you only play controller, but that's my thoughts in terms of trying to pick this apart as best as I can and look at many different angles, as best as I can at least. I'm not sure if I'm perfect with that, but we're going to move on now. So let's talk about buffs. We are going to look at mainly the PvP relevant buffs. I see some rocket launcher damage increases. I don't think that's the most relevant to PvP really, but we have a fusion rifle buff. It says fusion rifle usage is very low and they feel like an unreliable choice in the Crucible compared to shotguns. I'm not sure how much I agree with that or not, but okay, if the usage is very low, I guess cool. Increased fusion rifle damage fall off start distance based on the range stat. 6% increase with 0 range and 16% increase at the top end at 100 range. So sure, it doesn't seem like too insane of a buff, so it looks like they're just kind of nudging them and giving them a little bit more capability to play that mid-range better, which is fine. Instantly the thing I think about with this is, does this affect Bastion? Yeah, so that would be my main concern. Does this affect Bastion? And I'm inclined to believe it does. They also said reduce camera movement from firing a fusion rifle. I think they said this earlier as well. Did they say that? I'm not sure. No, they didn't. Okay, so the same thing, the camera movement portion of the recoil, which is the most significantly felt, is going to be lowered. So it's not going to be as jarring of a, push up when you fire. So that's going to make it more consistent. To be clear, the weapon is still, when they say camera movement, to be clear on this, the weapon is still recoiling. It's just your camera is not going to push up as much, and I don't believe your crosshairs are going to push up as much, but the weapon itself will still have recoil. So the recoil is not going to feel as jarring because of that screen shake, but it will still have recoil that you need to compensate for. So we also have a change that I've seen some people talk about, the breach grenade launchers. They said the usage is very low outside of the mountaintop, and they believe part of that reason is the loop of hold the trigger to arm and release to detonate is challenging to execute, particularly since projectiles can bounce off targets if the trigger is held. I think I disagree with that personally. The change here says breach grenade launcher projectiles will now detonate on impact with a character, even if holding the trigger. To be honest, I thought that's how it worked already. I'm not gonna lie, so this doesn't bother me too much. I don't think this is gonna really do much in PvP as much as it's gonna help maybe in PvE, but I do disagree personally with the hold to trigger, release to detonate being too hard. I think that's the skill in grenade launchers. We can say what we want about the noob tubes, and I complain about them a lot, but the whole point of them is to have this game where you are judging the distance and the travel time and detonating based on that, and that's where the skill comes in, and appropriately releasing and swapping to detonate, and perhaps cleaning up with your main weapon, your primary weapon. I think that needs to be maintained, and if this is hurting that, I'm inclined to disagree with that, even though I think this change is not going to be nearly as grand as I've seen some perhaps make it seem. This still has to be a direct impact. I don't know, it's hard to tell how this is going to play, because how this sounds to me is like when you shoot it at someone and it hits them, it's going to explode. But also if you bounce it and it hits them, it's going to explode. So the bounce and hit is concerning for me. The direct hit's not so concerning because I don't think that happens the majority of the time, but the, hey, I'm going to plop this into a hall around the corner, hold down the trigger, and then it hits someone off of the bounce and the ricochet and then explodes. I don't really like that, because again, that's taking away from the fact that you're supposed to be judging the range of that and the timing of the grenade itself and releasing. So I don't like that very much. Otherwise, the counter argument, I guess, is the fact that people with spike grenades have been doing this anyways, and people with proxy detonation, which is the majority of people in PvP, have been having this functionality anyways as well. So I don't know. I'm not sure really what to think about this, other than I guess my thoughts is I don't like changing the hold to arm, release to detonate. Moving on to nerfs, we have sniper rifles. So while sniper rifle uses has dropped in Crucible, definitely, I noticed them a lot less, we've observed that it's hard to challenge someone with a sniper rifle. Even if you get the first shot on an enemy, they can often respond and win the fight. Increased ADS flinch to snipers when taking damage from other players. Now, I made a video a while back saying, let's not, nerf snipers to the ground. Perhaps it might not be flinch. Maybe flinch isn't the problem. Let's tackle things like aim assist first. And, well, Bungie did that. Bungie made what they said was a sizable change to the aim assist cone on snipers. And I'm not gonna lie, it's made it a lot better. I think it's noticeable and, somewhat noticeable on controllers. I got some MK friends saying it's really not noticeable too much at all. Apparently controller players again saying it's more noticeable, but I still think sniping on controller is plenty powerful. So I guess really this is the next logical step. If they did the aim assist change that we proposed and we did the half step nerf, like that's not like right. We don't want to, as a community, we've said we don't want like, hey, nerf it to the ground type nerfs. We want gradual nerfs that are more frequent. That was the half step nerf, and here's the next step. So I don't like changes to flinch too much, simply because of what we've seen in the past, but I'm trusting that this is going to be hopefully another half step that's appropriate and not make it feel like in Destiny 1, in year 3 per se, where our crosshair will fly to the outer corners of our screen and our barrel will be present in front of us as we're trying to shoot someone. I think that's what we don't want. That's extreme, and I don't think I ever want to feel that on snipers again. It made me not want to snipe ever. Hopefully this is a very well-tempered change. I gotta give credit. I feel like they've been doing that. You can disagree with me. I feel like they have been doing that in the past decently well in terms of these half step nerfs. So I'm hoping this is like that, but we will just have to wait and see, of course, and give feedback when the time comes. Swords getting a PvE nerf. That's not most relevant for PvP, so I'm not going to worry about that. We have some exotic changes. Ace, Teraba, and Hawkmoon are now not going to lose their buff when you take out your Ghost, which previously counted as you switching weapons, which would deactivate these perks. Really happy to see this, of course. Borealis and Hardlight now have their own custom, a very short custom animation for switching damage type. Cool. Duality. This is, I think, the big buff here. That's an actual buff. Duality is getting increased damage fall-off distance by 1.25 meters. And that's both firing from the hip and aiming down sights. So I think a lot of people have given this weapon a lot of flack because it feels terribly inconsistent. Shout out to my friend Glow who loves it and think it shouldn't have gotten a buff. I definitely stand by this buff. This is going to give it range with its ADS and its slug form that's comparable to vanilla Chaperone without the perk, which I think as an exotic is kind of what it should have going for it. It's not going to be, I don't think, quite at the level of Chaperone, but it'll be around there. It'll be in that ballpark for vanilla Chaperone, which is good for an exotic. And then, of course, from the hip, it's going to get a little bit more range from the hip as well. The hip fire has been relatively inconsistent though. I always recommend using shotgun targeting mods with this weapon to get more out of the hip fire, but because it doesn't have things like opening shot or its own accuracy boost on top of that, it is relatively inconsistent. So we'll see if this improves the consistency. I think it will, but it's not going to be game changing. I think the biggest benefit's going to be from the ADS mode. It also says reduced maximum stacks from 7 to 5. Each stack now grants more of a damage bonus, extended buff duration slightly. So that means, I guess you're getting more damage boost per stack, and it's going to be a bit more relevant in PvP because it's going to last longer. So maybe you will have those Chaperone moments with this gun sometimes, but obviously not for 10 seconds like the Chaperone. So not the most comparable, but we'll have to wait and see how this acts when we get our hands on it. Overall, though, I like the duality buff. I think it needed it. Sturm is getting its ability back to reload special weapons, which is great. I was sad to see that go. There's a part of me that wants Sturm to be able to get the damage boost from special weapon or energy weapon kills again, but I know that is probably the least balancing in the world in this current sandbox, so definitely not going to happen. And they fixed the issue where Merciless was not able to increase the charge rate from getting non-lethal hits, which is cool. They also confirm here that they're going to be giving a tuning pass on Arbalest in the next season. So that's great because I absolutely hate that weapon. So I'm really happy to see that. Okay, I think that just about covers all of the buffs and nerfs here. So that's about all I have to say on my thoughts on the TWAB in terms of sandbox changes. Hope this was enjoyable. Feel free to disagree with me all you like. This is just my thoughts that I'm putting out there for those that want to hear them. Thanks.